last week's office hours will probably go up tonight, and I'll edit whatever we do today, if it's even safe for work. Who knows?
What did you guys discuss last week?
We discussed the drift problems with the sequencer that Brian has been finding, and we looked at different possible causes for it and differences between AudioKit 4 sequencer and AudioKit 5 sequencer.
Gotcha.
We didn't make any real progress in fixing anything. We just looked at a lot of things. Actually, Matt, do you want to say anything about having looked at that this week?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I did a lot of clocking and sort of timing, and we did some tests, and then I also did a little bit of a refactor on the recipe code itself, because we have there's like a getter, for the data that's the sort of app data or whatever, which includes the beat time. And so we were receiving the beat time, and that setter keeps getting called. And so every time that setter is being called, update sequence is also being called. So I sort of like separated that thing, and then was able to get some devices to be reliable. So like some devices running the recipe act like the metronome, the Hey Metronome app, and the Hey Metronome app, like they keep up together. So we have like partial parity by sort of like not constantly, changing out the observer function. But then beyond that, it's pretty rough. I talked to Jeff Cooper a little bit about his history with the sequencer and what he knows, and we sort of shared. We both have the same looking like logs on our computers, like it's all this time data and stuff like that. One thing I looked at was like the mock time concept that I was talking about, which is like go get the absolute time in the system and like look at what the beat time would look like if we derive the beat time from the nanosecond clock versus like deriving it from the count of the number of frames per buffer. And I did see divergence there, but like sort of running the recipe based on the nanosecond clock didn't have that kind of change. The only change I could find was the one to get the sort of high level code to stop interfering with the low level code in a certain way. So I kind of came up as like, okay, well, something about, and I don't think it's the code of the sequencer, but like something about the, the sort of observer usage versus like the internal render block usage, which is the essential difference between the two. Something about that difference makes it a little bit less robust. So then when we really jam it, kind of by, sticking it on a published getter situation or whatever, then it gets really bad. But so if we remove the sort of like hitting it at some other sort of frequency or whatever, then it does get a little better in some cases. So
it does seem like the update.
It
does seem like the update sequences thing is also related to the issue that somebody posted about changing the tempo of the new sequencer.
Right.
Is more is problematic somehow, that it
jumps around,
stutters or something. Yeah.
So and that issue would be like, we pay more attention to kind of like what time the current absolute time would be in a sequence if we're at this given beat time in a measure. It's kind of like a whole thing, and Jeff described it as like we rewind the clock a little bit, and so that's a whole thing. That's kind of an advanced fix to some degree. So it's like it's a lot more advanced, I think, than kind of what we've already got in the sequencer. So it's interesting, kind of like we're not doing anything with parameters in the sequencer right now at all. So then to like go and add stuff about tempo would also add stuff about how we kind of are just generally how that part of the code is aware of any of the other aspects of what's going on with it. So it's an interesting. One last note about the sequencing stuff was like that we do, like we put an observer now onto the node that a given sequencer track is supposed to sequence. And I was wondering about this idea of like MIDI audio units, or MIDI generating audio units is a specific like audio unit type for MIDI stuff. And I know that Jeff brought up that there's this issue of like, depending on which audio unit node you put the sequencer on, it's going to matter, because if things are in a signal chain or in a signal path, like one after the other, that ordering is going to change, like which one gets MIDI. But I was thinking like we could probably put any MIDI processors into a chain. Like if it was like, all right, here's a MIDI processor using an internal render block the way it was in version 4, but we just always put the MIDI ones in a sort of like, you know, pre the main set of audio signals, and then maybe that would kind of have a, or we could just make it more explicit, sort of like that the ordering matters or something. That was just a thought, if we wanted to like go back to the sort of internal render block model, which would most likely be like the biggest sort of slam dunk fix of like a lot of the issues. But anyway, yeah, that's what I got.
Okay. Well, unless anybody else has something to add about the sequencer, I did sort of promise Matt Pfeiffer that he could
Oh, nice.
use this time to talk about some things that he's been doing and some questions that he's had. So if it's cool with you, Matt, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, sure. So one thing that I've been just curious about is whether or not we have like a best practice for doing modulation. So I was hoping to just share my screen and kind of give everyone a clear idea of what I think about when I think about modulation. I think like some envelope or repeating pattern that can be applied to any parameter, regardless of like the values you're going to give them. So if you're familiar with Serum, here, let me make sure you guys can hear audio real quick. I think I got to send this to the Zoom client. All right. Can you guys hear that?
No.
Okay. I might, I think there's something special you have to hit when you share.
Yeah, there's a share audio button.
Yeah, share computer audio. Okay,
Yeah.
let's try that again.
Once you do that, you shouldn't have to do that other thing you did, but we'll see.
Okay.
Yeah, I can hear that.
So yeah, let's just pick something that's actually got some tables. And basically, you know, you've got some modulation that's applied to some parameter, and you could apply this to, you know, numerous parameters about your synthesizer. It's just basically like a generic, here's a modulation, it's got some table in it, and it needs some way to have like modulation matrix. And so, you know, my like naive idea of how to even begin to have this sort of thing would be to have some timer, and each time the timer hits, it changes a value, and that value changes something. So that's what I do in my app as I'm developing views, even though I know this is like a naive way to do something, but I'm working on different things that need modulation. I'm just going to cut that off so you guys don't have to keep hearing that. But I can just imagine that like a timer doesn't make sense. You're like discretely stepping through at some like interval and grabbing a new value, whereas you should be probably like locked in to the sample rate, and it should like literally be like an oscillator. It should be some lookup table that at a rate, you know, it's either grabbing a value or interpolating between two values. But yeah, I just didn't know if has like anyone tackled the concept of modulation. Is there already something built in an AudioKit that is aimed at doing this sort of thing? Yes, Taylor's looking at me, nodding his head. What should I be doing?
Well, I mean, that's my understanding is that's what operations are for. Isn't that right, Ari?
Well,
I mean, you have a flexible modulation system with that.
so you can definitely do modulation with operations, but in terms of getting that data, like operations kind of work well within themselves. Like you make an operation, it's got a sign or something, and you can apply that as a control rate thing or as an actual sine wave. But as far as getting that value out of the operation and using it for something else, I'm not sure if that's something
Well, I mean, you just have to build your whole synth out of operations.
Right. So, I mean, I guess that's, you can do it through operations, or you can also just do it as part of your DSP, right? It's kind of the same. The operations is the easier way of doing that. But I
Yeah,
think
well,
what,
you mean DSP, like we're just writing C++ that does the whole thing.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. But what about like, so this is what I was asking you about earlier, and I don't even know if it's a reasonable thing, but automation curves can take you from one number to another number linearly. Could you just, can automation curves be made so that they repeat? And so you make a curve that does some sine wave and you repeat it, and you've got an sort of an LFO applied to that parameter.
I wouldn't recommend it for a synth. I mean, it's really not a good way to do it.
Aren't
If
the
you can do it,
automation sample accurate and everything else? Is it expensive? Like, why don't you recommend it?
just architecturally, it's kind of, I don't know, not great.
It's just gross and on some level.
Yeah, it's just like a hack, you know? I mean, the right way to do it is to build something that's more modular, that can actually have modulation connections and can do, various computation like a modular synth would, and then feed that in as a control signal into modulation. And that's sort of what an operation can do. You can do all that with operations. I guess it's just, the thing is, AudioKit sort of lives in these two different spaces, right? You have the operations, and then you have the normal nodes, right? And you really want to be able to build a synth in a very modular way out of operations, I suppose. But the operations don't do as many things as the nodes do, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, in this case, are you even in the example that you showed with that graph you showed it for a split second was actually really cool. I'd like to see more of it.
Yeah,
You were doing
well,
that
I
with a
guess-
timer. Could that, I don't even know if you could do that with an operation. I suppose the operation is just changing a value, but then you'd have to grab the value out of the operation somehow. You store it in a parameter and then grab it out of the operations.parameters array, which I guess is possible. You still kind of have to pull that parameters array at the appropriate interval.
Mhm. That's why it feels like to me that doing anything on the Swift side here might have like major performance problems with doing this. Like I can almost not even see why it's better to not just use a timer. Like in my case, I just essentially set up this class I call a repeating timer, which is just this dispatch source timer. It hits at a particular interval. Like, I don't know, I just read online that this was the best timer to be using in order to like reliably hit at fast rates. Although, I'm not an expert here, and like my fear is that we can't do things like this on the Swift side, that we need to be, on these lower levels in order to do these things performantly. But that would make things weird because these different like C++ modules don't seem to like interconnect, I guess. Although I'm again, like I'm ignorant about a lot here, so I'm just trying to figure it out, because I'd love to build this. I'd love to try and figure out how this could be done. I just don't know what direction to go. I don't know like what's even wrong about using a timer necessarily, although I just don't like it for its discrete.
Well, I can tell you
Like,
what's wrong about it.
Okay.
It's just, it's inaccurate. I mean, that's one thing. I mean, especially if you want to do really fast modulation. I guess your timer is firing some envelope, right? Is that what it's doing?
Yeah, I mean, it's some repeating interval. So it's going to be something like really fast, and then
every
each
8
time it hits,
milliseconds. Every 8 milliseconds, it does what?
it's gonna shoot off a function. So in this case, it's shooting off fire, and it would just like move up an index value.
I see,
Essentially,
wait.
like what I would see, like here I've like built out something really specific, but in my mind, all it would do is like grab a new index value in a table, and then it would take that new value and apply it to a bunch of like transformation functions that would then, after the transformation function, hit the audio unit value. You know, the audio unit parameter would update any parameters that it needs to in order to be a modulation that applies to many things. You know, one pattern.
Okay, well, I'm not sure I parsed all of that, but like, let's say you have an LFO updating your wavetable position. Okay, that would be a use. That would be like roughly what you're doing. You've got some LFO updating it. You probably would evaluate that if you're really doing it the quote unquote proper way. You'd probably put that all within the audio, a single audio unit, right? And then you would have some control rate. You could do a control rate modulation that is, it's, you know, some fraction of the audio frame rate. So I don't think you wouldn't do it like externally like this, using a timer.
But then how would you apply that same thing to multiple, you know, parameters at once? Like, because you want to create something that's going to apply. I mean, would there just be some kind of, you're saying you'd like
LFO,
build it?
you mean, how does the LFO modulate multiple things in a synth?
Yeah, I guess just to put it
or some
like,
envelope or LFO modulate multiple things in a synth.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, every, you know, it depending on how often it's evaluated, every time it's evaluated, it writes its output value somewhere, and then the other places that need that, they just pull from it. You know, so if the oscillator is being modulated by the LFO, it just goes and looks every time it evaluates. It says, well, what's the current LFO value? Yeah, I think the problem is there is this. I hate to say it, but it's like an impedance mismatch, to use probably an overused term, which audio units aren't really designed to be put together to build a synth. They're really more like each one could be a synth, and you put them together to make a chain of synths and effects, or build a whole DAW. You know, it's like you wouldn't really want to build a synth out of audio units. You know, within a single audio unit. I mean, that's what, if you look at, I guess, just how Apple sort of intends them to be used. So
I think Taylor, I think you're really pretty right on with that, because of, I feel like because of the kind of performance that we see when we do that, you know, when you create all the components of a given like synthesizer, like here's the oscillator, here's another oscillator. If every oscillator and every modulation source was its own, you know, audio unit, then what you end up with is like a lot of threads that are all going to have, you know, they're all going to have to be serviced in sequence, you know, for the deadline, and that's going to end up building up a huge amount of sort of stuff. But there's also buses. I was going to say the input buses is another piece of it.
But you said multiple threads. They're not multiple threads. I think that the main
every DSP thing will have its own thread for an audio unit.
No. Each audio unit will not have its own thread. It's all single thread. Yeah. And an audio unit calls the next one in the chain. It's all on one thread.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Yeah. So, but either way, all those functions need to get processed in time, right? For the deadline.
Yeah. I mean, I don't even think it's like really a performance issue so much as just you can't modulate. I mean, without using weird hacks, I guess. Like, I guess you could.
Well,
you could make an LFO. If I could finish, You could make an LFO
sorry.
audio unit that just puts an LFO out on its audio signal and routes it to some audio unit. It'd be weird,
Yeah.
but
Well, that's
you
like
can
with
do that.
the input buses has that in the documentation. They sort of say if you need like a sideband modulation or whatever, they say like make another input bus and use that, which I don't see a lot of that anywhere in any of the code for any use of iOS, making more than
What
that,
they mean with
however
that
many
is
input
like
buses.
what they mean by that, I'm guessing, I could be wrong.
Oh yeah.
Is
Yeah.
that it's more for something like sidechain compression. I don't think they intend modulation signals to be going along the audio
Yeah.
connections between audio units. That's just my
Mm.
sense of it, is that it's not
Yeah.
really it's not a modular synth. It doesn't have control signals
Right.
running between its units.
Mm.
And so your argument is that if you built this all out in one audio unit, then it's a pretty simple task. And that's why certain iOS apps have this and it's not an issue. Whereas trying to piece together nodes and have each one of these nodes parameters subscribe to
Yeah.
modulation would be difficult.
I mean, Vital, this synth that came out recently.
Oh yeah.
Cool. It's a wavetable synth. It's open source. You can go look at it. I put money on the fact that on my guess that he doesn't he may use like Juice's thing, but I think it's probably all within, we could try to dig into the source if you want, but I'm guessing it's all, and I know Juice, actually. I know Juice fairly well.
Nice.
But I think I'm guessing it's in all a single audio processor or whatever is Juice's terminology.
So just brainstorming, is another potential thing to shoot down would be using Midi to control multiple things at once. So if these things are all responding to Midi, could there be one Midi control number that you are oscillating with a timer or whatever, and all of the nodes respond to that?
I mean, again, it's it's the same thing, and it's kind of a hack.
It's sort of like a plan. I mean, because that's like automation, right? It's like automation versus audio modulation, and so signals for audio modulation would be
if you have a really slow,
that's different, right?
If you have a really slow LFO or whatever, you could use MIDI, but you're certainly not going to get some of the higher, modulation rates, doing it that way.
And if you were slow, oh, sorry.
And if you want,
Matt's thing does seem like it's pretty slow, that his use case, but I don't know.
I mean, so maybe it'll work. I know that, when you start modulating things really, really fast and you get into the sort of audio rate modulation stuff, which I don't know, people in like Eurorack seem to like doing that. That would be pretty tricky to implement. You certainly couldn't do it, without putting everything within the DSP kernel. Yeah.
Well, interesting. I figured that this was something that other people had already solved, and it was just a best kept secret about how to accomplish this. But it sounds like if you look
like Synth1, it's one audio unit because it does all the modulation internally. I mean, we have the operations, which is actually a representation of Sporth, which is the underlying engine there. We're building out the Soul DSP. That's another thing that could do this type of work pretty easily. Yeah. And I guess this Faust DSP stuff that's coming out should be relatively, if you know Faust, then you should be able to do this kind of stuff there too. And maybe with all those three things, like people started using them, we'll see which one kind of works best or is the easiest. Because currently right now, operations would be easy, but it's not like I've done a very good job of documenting them outside of playgrounds. I could probably do more examples like in Cookbook and stuff.
Mm-hmm. Well, man, in the meantime, I really wish that we could come up with, I guess, a naive solution to this for lack of a better way to go, because I just feel like we need some way to implement this.
Well, I think the naive solution is to use operations, unless you can't do it with what you're doing with operations.
I forget how operations work. Is that going to output can I just have operations update a value and then I use that value and apply it to a bunch of different things? Or does operations hit one specific like audio unit? Or
So operations have a parameter array associated with them. So they are part of the signal chain. They can make sound and everything, but you can also store values that they calculate inside this parameter array. Then you can use them outside of there. But that's all on the Swift layer. Like, I don't know if to get that down into C somewhere else, you'll have to, call into your, use one of our AudioKit type of like AK change value in your DSP type thing. You still need to get that Swift level calculated value into the DSP if I understand things correctly.
Well, you could make new operations. I mean, you could do your entire synth within a single operation node, right?
I don't think there's a good example of doing a polyphonic operation-based synth. I mean, there's not even a good example currently of a polyphonic node. So I know there's not one for operations.
Okay, we just need polyphonic operations. Good to go.
Talk to me tomorrow. Yeah.
I don't know. You just need like a full voice allocator and and you just replicate the operations for each voice, and I don't know. It's kind of fun.
Yeah, I remember I did something like that with another project where I was building out everything with is like oscillator banks, and you don't want to see most of this, but I remember I had a bunch of different had a bunch of warp modes and all sorts of stuff that like I feel like was totally naive in how it was implemented. Man, I don't know if this is, oh, here's oscillators. So I basically just had all sorts of stuff where I would have to basically create a bunch of nodes from an oscillator bank and then kill them afterwards. And each oscillator had another oscillator that it would switch back and forth between in order to deal with wavetable changes, which was how I came up with the dynamic oscillator idea of switching between two different oscillators. So I had like some kind of function to change between wavetables, but yeah, because I just called this an oscillator voice, and every single MIDI value that came in, it would just shoot out to a different oscillator voice that would also have two oscillators and like a mixer, and it was just nasty. This whole synth eventually was kind of a performance mess, but within this I did all sorts of things like modulations that would even be shown on knobs, which was pretty cool. If I can pull up one of my like knobs with controls here, if it'll actually still create things for me. I know this project's pretty old, so it's got some issues, I'm sure, but the way a lot of parameters or so the way a lot of controls and synthesizers work is that they kind of have this outer ring that displays like what the modulation range is on that effect, and it also shows what the specific value is right now as the modulation changes. I think Serum would show that too. If I
think Massive is pretty good with that stuff.
Let's see. Yeah, so oops. This like outer ring on the wave position, it's like this inner like icon in it too that's showing where exactly it is right now as well. That all that sort of stuff, I would just love to create little views like these knobs and have some like generic modulation. So here was my knob that I made. I don't know if I don't know what all I can do with it right now, to be honest, but it basically had this little indication thing that would move around on the knob. And then I think there were other controls. I don't know if these are all just going to take forever to load. Okay, yeah, this one. It also had this like outer ring where you would show what the modulation range was on it. And it had little overlays that would show up on the knobs that would let you like indicates that this was something that you could like drag and drop on another control to apply the modulation. So anyway, this is, I know I've rambled on a lot about this, but I've thought pretty deeply about like what I would want a modulation to do if I could do it, and like how you might develop like different graphics and controls that would be just generically useful for everyone that would want to have this concept of being able to apply modulations to many parameters at once. And so, yeah, I was hoping that we could arrive somewhere where I had a direction to go. And so, like, can an operation hold a table?
Hold a table. How do you mean? Like, can there be a table defined inside an operation that it uses to output values into?
Yeah, so like the way most synthesizers work is that when these modulations want to be changed, there's some kind of table that can be like readily changed, and then that table would update the modulation. And so it really is just an LFO, right? It's an LFO reading a table, and then where it reads on that table, it takes that value at any point in time and updates the different audio unit parameters that should be updated to it in our case. So I don't know, maybe this is all like more complicated than I had like, simplified it in my head, I guess.
I'm looking at
far
the
as like how this
operations
could be
now to see if that has any
implemented.
table stuff.
Yeah, Matt. Yeah, I worked a lot on Synth One and all the LFOs. It's a single audio unit, so all the modulation is inside it. So that I understand really well. I feel like your use case, if it's really important for some modulation to not only modulate your custom oscillator parameters, but also other parameters of other nodes, that's a really tough problem to solve, and we're brainstorming different ways of doing that. But to me, if it's all within one synth, it's very straightforward. It's pretty logical. So that use case you have is very special. So I just want to poke on that, because if it's just within your custom oscillator, then there's so many fast, easy things you could do in the DSP layer. There's a lot of examples. But if you need that published outside of the custom oscillator, the custom oscillator has to use it and other nodes have to use it. Yeah, that's a tough problem to solve.
Well, why not, I guess, just hack in, use extra input buses and send your modulation signal over audio. I mean, this is not ideal, but it would probably work.
So then you would need every like audio thing that would need to be able to get affected by it then to have this like implementation.
Extra modulation bus, input bus.
And you could have, if you think about a synthesizer like an oscillator, say just whenever, like I have the Hydra synth, the ASM Hydra synth, and there's like, you could kind of send anything you want to an oscillator, any kind of modulation, but all of that modulation gets mixed before it hits the oscillator. So the oscillator really only needs like one bus on itself to get any number of modulations, as long as those modulations go through a mixer wherever they're generated. So you have to start thinking about the audio graph, but as a modulation graph, but you're not, you don't need to send every single source to an oscillator, right? You need to send them into a mixer for a given node or something like that. But if you're going to go in that direction, if that makes sense, does that make sense?
I think I'm following that. I mean,
So yeah, like if you have an envelope and you have an LFO, right? Those would go into a mixer before they go into the oscillator. So the oscillator only needs one extra bus for that modulation, right?
Mhm.
Which would take the output of a mixer. And so you could have like, n number of modulators, and any given node would just have one input, extra input for the n would get summed, right? And then it would go into that oscillator, for instance. So I'm
I
not sure if
totally
that would
don't
be like
understand. I
too
totally
easy.
understand that how you can do that. What if so you want to change? You want to take an oscillator and you want to make the volume a sawtooth, and you want to make the wave to the
Right.
frequency of different, like a sine or whatever, like a siren. And how would you sum two signals?
Right. Oh, so I was thinking about it like for a given part of a synth, like depending on how many parameters that part of a synth has, it's going to be one bus. So it's like, sorry, one bus per parameter of a node. So I
Okay,
don't know, but I was just thinking
that
about
makes
the
sense. That makes
oscillation. Yeah.
sense. One bus per
And
parameter.
yeah.
Yeah.
Right. It's more like that. Yeah. But yeah, so how many parameters you have, and that's just kind of, now you're getting into, Taylor's territory of genius, where it's like every single parameter with cables and all that. So that's the whole there thing. But if you wanted to hack in, I think, yeah, a small number of buses should get you there. But that's not super simple. As I don't know, maybe it is super simple, but I'm still working through making buses happen. And there's like the taps concept too, and however all that works, I don't really know. So
Yeah, I have to say, Matt, you did definitely, you're starting to push at AudioKit's limitations, right? Because we sort of designed with this node connection paradigm, and that's been something we've struggled with to build. You can't really build like an analog synth with it, even though the first thing we built was called analog synth. There was more of a hack to that than other things out there, like even Audios, right? That's designed to do this sort of thing, whereas AudioKit is more like, how can you make an app real quick and that does that is represented by a connection of nodes. So yeah, like I didn't see anything when I looked at the table real quick, operations, still see if there's any kind of table implementation. But perhaps that's something we could append to operations, or like I said, take a look at Soul or Faust to see if there's a better way of implementing your synth portion of your project.
Okay.
I have one other thought too. I didn't mention this. Taylor, maybe you have some thoughts on this little thought that I have too, which is like, say you have, if you're working strictly on like what you're showing here, where you have a graph or like a Bezier, and so that does end up turning into like a table of values,
Right.
and that you can like sort of edit that and keep that way, right? And in the higher level Swift stuff, and then you could have you could work on some thread safe structure that can be read. Once that's like set, you could be putting a pointer to it on a queue and then getting it over to whatever node needs it or something like that. And then once every node is done, using it, the sort of you'll if you use the smart pointers, you'll know that it's done. So there's that kind of, I don't know if Taylor, you can say it better than I could, but it's sort of, there's if you limit your modulation concept to sort of, we're just talking about these things that hold the tables, and we're not talking about sort of like generating everything live and calculating too much. Then you could maybe figure out something where there's a table in the Swift world, and then any given node that wants to read it can read it in a thread safe manner, fairly easily, or whatever. So
Sure. I mean, well,
yeah.
What I do for Audulus actually is everything goes across one thing. The nice thing about that is you don't have to have like a bunch of different queues for different parts of things that are updated. It's just one thing handles everything, all the communication. So, you change some table and everything goes across. It's not hard to implement, and there's already examples in AudioKit.
All right. Well, I
Yeah.
have taken up a lot of time here, so thank you guys for vamping on this topic. I can show you guys some of the views that I've been working on real quick. I know Ari was a little curious. So I had a wavetable array, and this is just using a timer to update the value, as well as like a wavetable view. And I've got various amplitude views. Of course, the volume isn't that loud right now. You guys have probably seen the spectrogram. I don't have a way to switch between the oscillator and a song yet, but I need to put that into the app. But I've got Seek added to our audio player. So you can jump to different parts of a track now. And I'll upload this this nice little view for tracks, because I think that nice little generic ability to jump to different locations, have the current time update will be cool. And
That's
then I
great.
also yeah, I had some cool like this little carousel view and showing the artwork. That's all built in, which is cool. But so one thing I was working on, like a rolling audio view, and this thing in most devices this won't keep up. I have performance issues with this one view that I'm working on in Swift UI, and I can't work through it just yet. I've tried a lot of different things, but I don't really necessarily want to jump into that. If other people have other topics that they want to bring up, I don't want to steal everyone's time. So does anyone want to take the floor from me here?
Well, I mean, we could discuss that because it'd be the first thing we discuss next week, and so I'd love to see more of that. Maybe you'll have everything figured out by then, but that would be a cool topic.
Okay.
Those are great views too, man. I love your stuff. It's so cool.
Thanks, man. Yeah,
It's looking
well,
really nice.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll give you back the floor, Ari.
Okay, well, I mean, I don't really have it unless somebody has any more questions. I think that was a fine office hours. Lawrence, do you have a question?
Yeah, I'll
Go
jump
for it.
in. I'm trying to do a multi-track recorder. Oh, I got a little bit of a echo here, don't I? Where do I start? So I have a clip recorder, and sometimes what I try to record from point 0 to point N, and sometimes the end time that I get back from the clip recorder doesn't match the end time that I've set up. So then I can't sync up my tracks in time very easily. I was messing around with the recorder a bit with record clip, and then it takes a start at recording start time. I saw some sample code for that, which takes let's see here, basically an AV audio time argument, right? Which seems like that would be pretty accurate, but then when you're trying to sync up tracks, the players take seconds. So I guess I'm a little bit confused. Like, I guess I can sync with seconds accurately enough, or should I be trying to do something else to sync up multiple tracks to play? Especially like if you're like, you got, a track recording and then you record another one, it gets done, and then you need to sync it up basically with the other track. I figured it out, but there was I had to kind of put in basically a timer that would fire you know, to the correct number of seconds. Because
So are you using AudioKit 4 then? So you're
Yes,
saying
I
clip
am.
recorder. Okay.
yeah,
Um,
and I guess that was another question. Is I want to move forward, but I kind of like the clip recorder, and I know 5 didn't have it last time I checked. I haven't checked recently, but
yeah, so a few things got removed. That like clip recorder, I think got removed because it was very much centric to, or it was created by Dave O'Neill, who's not around to maintain it anymore.
gotcha.
And so if anyone wanted to adopt it and make sure it works with AudioKit 5, that would be okay. But that's the reason why it was dropped. So
Gotcha.
I'm taking a look at it now real quick to remind myself what it was good at doing.
I mean, I liked it because you could specify the exact length of time that you want to record. So, you know, if you're doing, you know, a loop recorder, essentially you hit your start time, your end time, you got that length of time. And then from that point, you want to be able to, you know, record those loop clip lengths. But sometimes I get a clip back from that thing, and the end time is actually not. Sometimes it's right on the money. Sometimes it's a little shorter than the other end time. If it's longer than the end time, then at least I can kind of set it to the same end time. But it's a little inconsistent about the exact time that comes back from the clip recorder. You know, so.
Right.
A lot of times it works, but then sometimes it didn't. So, and then I tried to prepare the player, and that didn't work. But then if I kind of give it enough time, then it seems to work itself out. Maybe it's like buffering in the background or something. But it was a little persnickety.
So is this simply that you have multiple players and you can't get them to fire off at the same time?
Right. Yeah. And then the other thing is like, how do you fire multiple players at the same time? Right. And it's like at a certain point, you just got to stop everything and then try to start them all. You know, it'd be cool if you could just somehow say, okay, here's my array of players. You know,
start all
everybody start at the same time. You know, I mean, I guess the question is, what's the correct method for doing a DAW implementation?
Yeah. Like, well, I guess if you did this with AV audio engine directly,
right,
instead of using AudioKit,
right, then you get into AV time and all that kind of stuff versus then I have to kind of go to a lower level and
right. But I just wonder if Apple has solved this problem, like, because you can schedule it to start fairly precisely, right? And as long as you just give it a little bit of
there's the
future,
buffer time.
you know, so you say to all your players, you say, okay, you all start at this point,
right?
And then as long as you get through them all before they need to start, then they're all going to be set up and ready to go. Is that
right?
Is that basically what you would do?
Yeah, I think so. I just want to make sure, because I'm just using, you know, AK Player, so it's not.
Is that then that? But that is built on top of AV audio engines.
Right. So I guess
Player, or is that some other thing?
I think it is. Yeah.
Hmm.
I think underneath, but I don't know if I can get at like those specific lower level things to get something to start at an exact time.
Well, isn't there a host time that you could just schedule all the players to hit? I could have sworn
that's the thing, is that like the clip recorder takes host time, right? And then the AK players basically take seconds. So it's, you know, when you're talking seconds, then it's not the same thing anymore. So if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm looking at our various players to see back in AK4, the AK player, what it was really based on.
There is, I guess, their AV frame position, frame count, but those are getters and not setters, right?
Yeah, so the AK player was based on AV audio player node. So anything that you can do with that, you should be able to do it with the AK player. And I believe most things are exposed, but if it's not, I could pretty easily extend it.
Okay.
Are you on our Slack group? Because I think Ryan, if you're using, it sounds like you're using a lot of things that Ryan Francesconi is using. He might
Okay.
be he might be a
He
good,
might be a good resource for that.
Yeah.
Ryan Frennan.
And he wrote a lot of that stuff, right?
Yeah, he wrote all of AK Player, for instance. So
Okay.
yeah, Dave O'Neill did the clip stuff, but I'm not sure. And Ryan's definitely used recording. Is he recording? I think he was adding recording to his stuff. So I'm not sure if he's using what he's using for recording, if he's even implemented anything yet.
Okay. Great. That was, yeah, just sort of my general question. If he's a good resource, I mean, I'm slowly working this stuff out. I just wasn't, you know, it's like with the clip recorder, there's certain things with, you know, not using seconds and using these buffers, and then the player uses seconds. So I wasn't sure which direction I should go.
I mean, I'd obviously like you to bang your head against the wall with AK5 and figure out how to make it work for you so that,
okay.
yeah, I mean, anything that, if you're on, are you on, do
I'm
I need
on
to
the,
invite you? You're on, okay. So
4.11
yeah,
or
like
whatever, yeah.
if you want to do, I was saying if you're on the Slack, if you wanted to try AK5 out and see what hits you, you could probably like
Okay.
Slack me on there directly and see if we
Okay.
could work through some of the issues. Like even like, you know, Matt just added the seek capability to the
Right.
player in AK5. So you can, attest to the fact that it is changeable, and
Yeah.
we can make it do these things for you.
Okay.
It sounds like, a pretty reasonable expectation, like to be
Yeah.
able to build a DAW with AudioKit. I think a few people have done and want to do that sort of thing. So
Are you making the next breakthrough DAW, Lawrence?
I don't know about that. We'll have to work through these problems first.
But you are making a DAW.
Yeah, I have the app called Loopstar, and basically it just has a drum machine mixed in with a loop recorder. But
Cool.
but yeah, you can set it up to record, you know, tracks for, you know, however long you want. So yeah, I guess that's another question is there's AK sequencer, and you know, I mean, is AK sequencer and a player going to be able to stay in sync? Do you think, or is that going to kind of drift around too much?
well, I would think that the sequencer would have to be the object that's in charge of everything.
charge,
Like,
okay.
yeah. So if you know, schedule your player's playback with the sequencer sort of thing.
Right.
And as far as looping, you might have to worry about like fading out so that these points are not choppy or whatever. But
right. Yeah.
you definitely want one source of timing there.
Right. Gotcha. Cool. All right. Thank you.
I definitely want to see updates of how that goes. And like I said, if you need help on Slack, just hit me up. And if you are not on Slack, just send me an email. I'll add you.
Great. I will.
Cool.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. Anybody else have any questions I can't answer? All right. Well, maybe next week we can do Matt's new views and stuff, and maybe we'll have some sequencer stuff from the other Matt. Just gonna like assign Matts to different things. Cool.
All right.
All right.
Thanks,
I guess-
everyone.
Well, great seeing you guys.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, nice stuff.
All right. See you later. Thanks
Thank
again,
you.
Ari.
Yeah. Have a good one.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.